From the Starr Conspiracy and the content channel, Hey, Brett Starr. I'm Brett Starr. This is Long Strange Trip, Episode 3.
I'm Dan McCarron. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Starr Conspiracy. And I grew up in Austin, Texas. Went to school with you and a few other luminaries in our agency at Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. A full 29 miles away from home. And I was pre-med there. And I took my pre-med degree and went straight to the music industry.
What happened?
I spent the next decade at Universal Records in New York. And then after the digital revolution, headed back to Texas to join what is now the Starr Conspiracy.
The digital revolution in music.
In music.
So you saw the
to
writing.
Be specific.
Yeah. Didn't you become like a real estate agent or something like that for like a brief period of time in like Brooklyn?
I did. I had a brief stint as a Manhattan apartment renter in the financial district, which was interesting.
How'd that work out?
You know, it was funny. At the record label, the general rule of thumb was one successful act pays for the other 19. And in showing apartments in the financial district, you generally had to show about 20 times to rent once. So it was a familiar ratio.
Did you successfully place a lot of tenants in rental properties?
I did, but I admit it was boring. It got boring pretty quickly. It lasted about 6 months.
And were a lot of people leaving the record industry at the same time?
Whether they wanted to or not, yes. They were big labels were downsizing rapidly.
Yeah.
Before Napster and LimeWire and all the sharing sites, we were selling full CDs for $19.99, usually for one song that anybody wanted, on an album. And that quickly went the way of the dinosaur once people could just get the one song they wanted for free.
Well, I don't want to just gloss over your music career because your music career was pretty significant. I love telling stories about all the acts that you worked with and the people that you discovered. And what are some of the bigger acts that your group signed? And of course, I want to talk about Afro Man, but we'll get to Afro Man. But what are some of the big acts that you worked with?
I love when you tell stories about my music career because you never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
I don't.
much more exciting that way. Our biggest selling acts were Nelly. I got to work with Nelly and the St. Lunatics. They're a great group of guys. And probably got to spend the most studio time with those guys of any act I worked with. Three Doors Down was another massive seller in our label. And a few other big ones. And we had strings of one-hit wonders who sold their share of records.
Who's your favorite one-hit wonder?
My favorite one-hit wonder has to be Afro Man.
Afro Man. Well,
because I got high.
Yeah, that's kind of not fair, though, because, my understanding of the Afro Man story is that he was much more than a one-hit wonder, but timing is everything. And he got kind of double or triple whammied.
He really did.
Yeah. So how did you actually discovered Afro Man, right? You know what I mean? Like you were the person who approached him. You were the first major label rep to go out and listen to him. You approached him about a deal. You made the deal happen. That was like your first, start to finish big act, right?
That's right. He's from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and he was doing his thing down there, selling CDs out of the trunk of his car, and got his music on a local college radio station, and the rest was history. And September 11th cut his radio career short.
Well, y'all re-recorded an album, right? So he sent y'all demos and stuff like that, or did you just release his original recordings?
We released the original recording.
So you released his original recordings, and if I remember correctly, shortly after the release of Because I Got High, it went to like international #1. It was one of the largest, most successful selling international singles of all time. And this is where I tend to exaggerate, I think, but wasn't it released on like September 1st or something like that? Like it was really soon before September 11th, right?
No, it actually came out, I think, early in the summer of 2001. And
you'd been with the agency for, at the time, probably 13 years, and been a partner for 8 or 9 years when the pandemic hit. Just another, kind of event, this time on a global scale, that changes everything. At what point did you realize that the pandemic was going to change everything?
Well, that's a good question. Between the time we started hearing about the coronavirus, remember it was just called coronavirus?
Yeah, coronavirus.
Between then and when it really started to impact our day-to-day lives, there was an amount of time, I can't remember what it was, but it felt like a month or two. And some things I think started to happen locally that really reinforced the nature of a viral spread, and kind of opened my eyes to, this thing has come to town, basically. And I remember the first case of COVID in Fort Worth was there happened to a pastor, what do you call it, Episcopalian priest.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
At the church, just 2 short blocks from my house.
Yeah, over by TCU, right?
Yeah. And this is the church where my son learned to ride his bike in the parking lot. It's like just around the corner from our house. First case of COVID in Fort Worth.
Didn't he pass away?
No.
No, he didn't.
He survived. But that's when it really felt like, this is real. This is almost literally in our backyard. And it started making me think about, people who shop in the grocery store, 2 blocks in the other direction. Mm-hmm. And was this priest one of them? And, made me think about my family and my wife and our kids. We're going to see my parents next weekend, and they haven't really accepted the threat of COVID yet. And the first case here is in our neighborhood, and are we bringing it to them? And am I going to put my parents' lives at risk? And pretty quickly it all started to come together for me. Just seeing it kind of unfolding firsthand in our city.
Yeah, you and I were in pretty constant communication at that time, because I think we shared a couple of things in common that were really significant. First is that we were running a business together, and we had to figure out what the hell to do. And, one of the reasons that, I'm reaching out and, talking to different people, owners of the business and people who are on the team and clients and, just a bunch of different folks, is I'm trying to piece together, everything that we went through and how we responded. Because I think that there's a lot of things to learn in there somewhere. And I also don't feel like most of us, and I don't mean just at the Starr Conspiracy, but I mean out in the world, that most of us have just taken the time, to absorb all of the significant change that we've been through, and really do a critical assessment of, what we want to hold on to, and, what we want to let go, and what we did right and what we did wrong, and, how we can find the opportunities to do better now and in the future. So you and I had daily, like multiple times a day conversations, because we were talking about the business, but we were kind of like setting policy for our families, like our extended families in the pandemic. And so, there's at your house, there's your family, and then there's your parents. And, at my house, there's my family, and there's Jennifer's parents. And everyone was kind of looking to me to, kind of say what was okay. It's like, by presenting, this was one of the biggest frustrations that I had during the pandemic, is like I was reading a bunch of stuff and processing a lot of information, and I would say, okay, here's the recommendation from the CDC now, here's the, et cetera. And suddenly I became like the COVID cop or the coronavirus cop around, the house at the time. And everything was talked about, like what Brett would allow or not allow. And I was like, I'm not, I'm just telling you what, like the science is saying, what the CDC is saying. And it's like, yeah, you're supposed to wear a mask. And yeah, we're not supposed to, travel right now and stuff like that. And yeah, but I feel like the experience that we had at work of, having to acknowledge, what was happening because we had to set policy, for the agency. Also kind of bled over into our personal lives. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, like you said, we were really studying data and CDC recommendations, and I think both of our browsers had those tabs open at all times and refreshing all day long. And I'm glad that you're a prepper, because you took that and created a safety plan for the agency, which I think both of us used in our personal lives, but for the agency, which was by design on the conservative end of the spectrum, which is not an easy thing to do in an environment where not everyone accepts, what's going on, or the danger of the nature of the pandemic, or whatever the case may be. It's not like, hey, everybody's adopting this approach, let's do that, and everyone gets on board pretty easily. It was swimming against the stream, by some measures at least. And I think if you hadn't been prepping all along your lifetime, your prepper skills, that wouldn't have happened so easily or so successfully. And I remember in our weekly meetings celebrating what seemed like forever that we hadn't had a case of coronavirus in our agency. Mm-hmm. It was a really long time.
It was.
During the pandemic. And it was, at least in large part because of that approach that we took.
How do you think the pandemic has changed your outlook on life? Or, your life plans or your goals for the future? Has anything changed because of the pandemic?
Those are some big questions. It's changed some immediate things in my life, mostly of a routine or logistical variety. And for most of us, like in our agency, like working from home. I used to really love going into the office, and that changed pretty radically. And I've gotten really comfortable working from home, and go into the office once in a while now. And I still prefer working from home, working or interacting digitally with other people from a work perspective. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot easier for me because I can't hear very well in person, especially when there's noise in a room. And Zoom was like a godsend for me. It's like, I can hear everybody perfectly now, right? No matter how many people are in the meeting. So little things like that. I was thinking about September 11th and about the pandemic, and I've always been attracted to kind of a Taoist view of the world, not a decentralized autonomous organization, which is also compelling, but there's a Taoist parable about the Chinese farmer we've talked about, and it has to do with not ascribing a judgment to the things that happen in life of good or bad.
Story well. I'll tell the parable.
Okay, so the the farmer in ancient China, and he and his son run their one horse farm, and one day the horse runs away, but they don't have any horsepower to turn the grist mill. And all the neighbors came over wringing their hands and said, "Oh, this is so terrible, Farmer Lee, your only horse is gone. What are you going to do?" And the farmer says, "Well, we'll see." The next day, the horse comes back with 3 stallions in tow, chasing her home. And now their stable has grown fourfold. And all the neighbors come over to congratulate him. "This is so wonderful. You have all these powerful horses now. You can run your farm, better than ever. This is such good luck, such good fortune for you." And he says, "Maybe, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We'll see." The next day, while he's breaking one of the new horses, the son gets thrown and breaks his arm and leg falling off the horse. Can't help his older father with the farm, and the neighbors come over. "This is such a terrible thing. Your son is immobilized. He can't help you." He says, "Maybe it is, maybe it isn't." The next day, the Chinese army comes through town and takes all the able-bodied young men off to war and almost certain death. And the neighbors who have lost all their able-bodied sons come over and say, "You're so lucky, your son is still with you." And he says, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. And so on and so forth. Whew. So when I think of things, usually in the rearview mirror, like September 11th, or not quite in the rearview mirror, the COVID-19 pandemic, I tend to think of them, or try to think of them through that same lens. And this is a long-winded way of saying there's a lot of good that comes out of things that happen in life that seem bad.
There's just so many wonderful, inspirational stories of people who have been in situations that are absolutely the worst. I remember reading an article in the New York Times about many people who survived the Holocaust and what their kind of strategies were for survival. And in almost every case, not just in that situation, but in multiple situations that are just so tragic that they kind of bend the mind in terms of just trying to understand what the hell's going on. It all came down to mindset, and just how you can stop waiting for good things to happen and find the good things that are already happening, even in kind of the darkest periods.
You mentioned the word experience, and I think central to all the changes that we've made as an agency since this pandemic started is the experience of everyone who works in our agency being of primary focus, putting the work experience of everyone at the Starr Conspiracy above all else was the most important shift that we made. And you're right, the last person to leave the agency left very early in the pandemic voluntarily to pursue an opportunity she had. And that was before we had really made the shift to employee experience or work experience happen. And since then, we've only grown.
There's always an article. Every week there's an article about, the 4-day work week. And it's almost like articles about coffee. Is coffee good for you or bad for you? It's like one week it's great for you, the next week it's bad for you. There's all these articles about the 4-day work week and, how much it sucks or how great it is or whatever. But the problem with, most people's view of, how we work and with most people's view of, say, the 4-day work week is that those are not, transformational changes in and of themselves. It's the change that happens, which manifests in the ability to do things like that, which is the important stuff. And that's all very out of the public eye. It's very hard to understand the mind shift that we went through to put, the team experience before the customer experience and before the shareholder experience. And the way that we came to understand and value the deep work context and the deep collaboration context. We did a lot of things right. And I'm speaking objectively. So far in the pandemic, we've done a lot of things right, and we can prove it. We can prove it in terms of measures of the team experience, measures of the client experience, measures of the business performance. We effected a complete transformation and business turnaround in the middle of, a once in a century, kind of challenge, global challenge. And so we know we did a lot of things right. And, there's all kinds of qualitative, assessments as well. Not losing anyone, not having to fire anyone, not having to lay anyone off. Just, anecdotes from people about their experience compared to the experience of their friends who work for other organizations. But we did a lot of things wrong as well over the last 20 years, but also over the last, kind of couple of years. Is there any decision that we made that you'd like to take back, like something that you kind of look back on over the past 2 years and say, gosh, I wish we hadn't done that, or something you think we got really wrong?
Man, that's a tough question. I've been so, I guess I've been so focused on the positives and our response to this pandemic that I haven't really been looking for things we've done wrong necessarily.
Last question that I have, and a good one to close on. What lessons have you learned during the pandemic that you want to take forward with you, or that you would share with others?
I've become a lot better listener in the pandemic, and I love simple life maxims. And I think a big one is listen to other people. I'm gonna leave it right there, as simple as that, and that's right.
Did you see that Southwestern was awarded the #1 National Liberal Arts School in Texas at the U.S. News and World Report?
I saw that.
I'm glad it wasn't
Some
like
stiff
that.
competition.
Yeah, I never would have gotten in.
Maybe they'll come back like vinyl record stores, like, hey, a CD store. We're in charge of keeping everybody safe, and you are also responsible for sucking the joy out of everyone's lives.
I just have made a practice of forecasting and predicting different terrible things that can happen.